You like
That
swap
gives
in
the rest
like
of us an excuse, right?
Okay, hold on now. I think it's going to go through. It's now live, Jenny.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to April Rogue Reads. We have such an amazing lineup for you tonight. We are going to be with Robert Dugoni, Cate Ellison, Cate Holahan, and Paul Vidich. I am thrilled to introduce you to these authors. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping stuff or kind of an intro to the process, and then we'll dive right into these amazing authors we get to hear from tonight. So my name is Jenny Milchman. I am a psychological thriller author and a member of Rogue Women Writers. The Rogues are a group of 6 thriller authors with backgrounds ranging from former intelligence officer to journalist to White House strategist. I'm none of those. Participants tonight who are in the Zoom will be in the gallery during the reading, and we encourage you to introduce yourselves, type a few questions. I'm really hoping we'll have time to get to Q&A. All of the authors' new books discussed here tonight and their backlist titles are available through your local bookstore, bookshop.org, or Amazon. And let's use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about your exciting night on Rogue Reads. We're going to go in alphabetical order. I'm going to introduce you to each author and tell you about their new book. And then each author, you'll get to say like a little hello. I'll ask you to tell us a bit more about your book. We'll go in alphabetical order. Did I say that? Then we'll circle back around. I will ask a couple of questions about each of your books, more like personal, individual, not personal, I don't know why I said that, individualized questions. And then, this might be a curveball for some of you. I will ask you to read a brief excerpt from your books. Now, if you're one of those authors who hates to read, don't worry about it. I have tons of backup questions and we can just do a little bit more of that. But if you do like to read, I know our audience members love to hear from the authors, just like a, like a 20 to 30 minute like a 2 to 3 minute excerpt from your book would be fantastic. All right, so let us get started. We're going in alphabetical order, but I'm going to flip-flop it at some point so Paul, doesn't always feel like the kid in the classroom, like at roll call, being a V. But we'll start with regular old alphabetical order first. And we have Robert Bob Dugoni with us. I also wanted to let you guys know I'm going to be leaning off screen because each of the authors were kind enough to submit either their favorite drink of choice or their character's favorite drink of choice. And I've got that with me tonight. So Bob was real easy. Hold on, guys. We are raising a glass of red wine for Bob. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Cheers.
Robert Dugoni is the New York Times bestselling, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and #1 Amazon bestselling author of the Tracy Cross-White police series set in Seattle. It has sold more than 6 million books worldwide. He's also the author of the Charles Jenkins Espionage series and the David Sloan legal thriller series, as well as several standalones. And his literary novel, The Extraordinary Life of Sam Hall, was Suspense Magazine's 2018 Book of the Year, and Dugoni's narration, Bob's narration, sorry, I don't know why I switched to your last name, won an audiophile earphones award, which is just very, very cool. Several of his novels have been optioned for movies and television, and he's a 2-time finalist for the Thriller Award, the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction, the Silver Falchion Award, and the Edgar Award. Bob, tonight, welcome, first of all, to Rogue Reads. Tonight, you're going to be talking about In Her Tracks, the 8th Tracy Cross-White book. And what I have here is that Tracy is returning to Seattle after an extended leave in her hometown. And she's immediately swept up and then torn between the cold case of an abducted 5-year-old and the terrifyingly active case of a jogger who vanishes off an isolated trail. Can you tell us, please, about In Her Tracks?
Okay, so I'm going to give you the ending. No, I'm not going to give you the ending. So, Tracy is an evolving serial character. When you write a series, you kind of have 2 options. One is to write a series where the character evolves and grows and their life changes, or you write a series where, like James Bond, the character always begins at point A and off we go. So Tracy has evolved over 8 books. She starts out a very isolated, very driven woman who is dealing with a tremendous amount of guilt regarding the loss of her sister at 18 years of age. She feels responsible for that. And as the series evolves, Tracy grows, and people come into her life, and she finds a wonderful man that she falls in love with and has life with. And so in her tracks, she has gone on maternity leave because she's had a little girl, and she's on maternity leave, and something happens in the book A Cold Trail that causes basically some PTSD, situational PTSD. So she takes an extended leave. By the time she gets back to the violent crime section in Seattle, she's been gone for about 3 or 4 months. And so has another of their detectives. And so it gives her nemesis, her captain, Johnny Nolasco, an opportunity to basically fill her spot justifiably, because they're very busy. And when she comes back, he says, sardonically, there's no spot on violent crimes, but we do have a spot in the cold case unit, which is part of the violent crime section. So she's torn between whether she wants to take this job on violent crimes, in which she'll be the only detective. There's only one cold case detective in Seattle. And she ends up taking the case, and of course is immediately drawn to the story of a young girl who disappeared 5 years ago in a corn maze. And while she's in the midst of that investigation, she gets a call from one of her former team members who says, "I need some help. He's got a missing female jogger in a park in Seattle, and she's never come home." And so she begins that investigation as well. And it's really a story about appearances can be deceiving. And in sort of one of the most benign looking neighborhoods, you have absolutely no idea what's going on behind the closed doors. So it comes out tomorrow. Tomorrow's launch day, and Amazon's very excited about it. I'm very excited about it. Pre-sales have been very, very good. So fingers crossed, and hopefully everything will go well.
I was going to say that when I Googled you or something, or one of your titles, the first thing that came out was that was a sponsored ad from Amazon for In Her Tracks. So I think it seems like you're off to a great start. And I love that intro to it. I love what you said about that distinction in a series about evolving characters versus, the person we just sort of stay with like a level. So that's great. And we will ask you more about it. But let us say hi to JT Ellison tonight. JT hails from Nashville with kittens, right?
Yes. One of whom is winding around my feet as we speak.
Oh, that'll help. JT Ellison is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of more than 25 novels and the Emmy Award-winning co-host of the TV literary show A Word on Words. Love that. With millions of books in print, her work has won critical acclaim, prestigious awards, and been published in 28 countries. And I already talked to you about the kittens, so I don't have to say that again. Although I want to, kittens. And let's move on to, hold on a minute, JT's drink. We tried our best, we really did. It's called Franklin Bubbles, right? And isn't it like pink and something fizzy, and is this close? Cheers, JT.
Scotch and champagne, you can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong with that, my God, it's like double the fun. Okay. Her Dark Lies. This is what I wrote about it. A destination wedding off the coast of Italy, a handsome, charming groom, and a whole guest list's worth of secrets. What could go wrong? Everything. JT, tell us about Her Dark Lies.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So it is the story of a young up-and-coming large format oil painter named Claire, who has met the man of her dreams, Jack Compton, who is the son of an incredibly wealthy computer magnate. And he is just this spectacular guy, and he's madly in love with her, and they are getting ready to go off for their wedding. There's only one problem. Jack was married before, and his wife died 10 years earlier, and they're not allowed to talk about it. He won't talk to her about it, and she is incessantly curious about the first Mrs. Compton. And of course,
Oh,
things
really?
go off the rails, because it's a J.T. Ellison novel.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the things I noticed in reading about it was sort of that fear factor blended with that thriller factor.
It is. It's a Gothic, and it's very much an homage to our earlier wonderful Gothic writers, the Christies, and so this is a little bit of Rebecca, a little bit of Then There Were None, a little bit of Talented Mr. Ripley. There's a whole bunch of things going on, and it's a thriller, which is, instead of being a suspense novel or a mystery where the reader is finding out as the character is what's going on. In this, I'm not trying to obscure what's happening for the reader. So the reader actually knows more than the characters. And that, I think, is really fun for me. I love for people to think they know what's happening and then actually maybe they don't, maybe not quite.
Yeah, it's a whole different avenue to the suspense and the
Right.
secrets. Yeah, we'll get into that. And especially some of the authors you talked about paying homage to, because I love that. Okay, so still in alphabetical order, we're going to go on to Cate Holahan. And Cate is the USA Today bestselling author of now 5 novels of domestic suspense, one of my absolute favorite genres. They're all published by Crooked Lane Books. And in a former life, Cate was an award-winning journalist and the lead singer, this is so cool, of Leaving Kinsley, a rock band in New York City. Maybe Paul went to hear her. An American writer of Jamaican and Irish descent, Cate is a member of the Crime Writers of Color and lives in New Jersey. And Cate sent us her characters drinks, which I always love when that happens. So I chose the husband because I just wanted to go off my usual. So hold on. I believe that Greg takes his scotch neat.
I think he does. Yeah.
This is a whole lot of scotch, y'all. Like if I drank this, I would not be hosting Rogue Reads tonight. Anyway, Cate, her 3 lives. Terror on the home front in the form of a brutal house invasion exposes the cracks in a new couple's seemingly elegant and success-bound facade. Can you tell us more about her 3 lives? Introduce us to the novel.
Sure. Well, actually, it's my first novel published by Hachette. So this is Grand Central Publishing.
Okay,
And,
so Crooked Lane, then Hachette. Thank you.
Right. So, and so it tells the story of Greg and Jade. Greg is a successful architect. He is on his kind of second chapter. He's met Jade. He's 52. She's 32. She's a kind of a influencer for home design who wants to be a designer, but does pretty well with her blog. And this second act is interrupted by a home invasion in which Greg is struck over the head with a crowbar and suffers a traumatic brain injury. And so he outfits his whole house with all of these cameras that so many of us have, the Nest cams and the Ring doorbell cams and everything. And as he's trying his best in this compromised state to protect his home, he starts to wonder whether his wife, who he sees on the cameras, his new fiance, had anything to do with the break-in and attempt on his life. And this is kind of complicated by the fact that he has an ex-wife and adult children who all have their opinions on what everyone's motives are.
New beginnings can be the hardest of all. Sounds very creepy. Okay, I love it. Okay, and last but not least, and as I told you, we are going to flip-flop our order, so for alphabetical. But right now, Paul Vidich. Paul Vidich was a senior executive in the entertainment industry for over 20 years before turning to writing full-time. His 3rd novel, The Coldest Warrior, was shortlisted for the 2020 Staunch Book Prize in the UK. And his fiction and nonfiction have both appeared in the Wall Street Journal, LitHub Crime Reads, The Nation, and elsewhere. His short story, Falling Girl, was nominated for a 2011 Pushcart Prize. Congratulations. And The Mercenary is the novel that Paul is here to talk to us about. It's the Soviet Union in 1985. We can all cast ourselves back there, the communist regime in the last stages of decline. And a senior KGB officer demands to be exfiltrated. I didn't even know that was a word until I got introduced to Paul's work. By a defector to the CIA named Alex Guerin. Paul, please tell us more about The Mercenary.
Oh, thank you, and I'm glad to be here. It's great to listen to the others talk and to be last. I think there's a benefit. So This is my fourth novel. It started with An Honorable Man, which is set in 1953 in the CIA. And the protagonist in that novel is a guy named George Mueller. In 53, he's 34. And in this novel, 1985, he's in his early 60s. And so one of the things I've done with this recurring character is have him evolve in two ways in each of the novels. The first is he was not interested in being in the CIA initially, left, and then comes back and then embraces the CIA in a serious way. And by this novel, he's the chief of station in Moscow. But the other thing I've done is, rather than have him be the principal character in each book, he goes back and forth from being a principal character to being a minor character. And in this book, he sort of shares the spotlight with this other character, Alex Guerin. The novel starts with a failed exfiltration. It's on Red Square. George Mueller is caught, and the attempt to pass documents out of the Moscow ends. And they call up another character, this character, Alex Guerin, who is outside of the CIA at that time, but is brought back because he's requested by the Soviet lieutenant colonel who has documents he wants to get out of Russia. And at that point, you begin to learn a little bit about Alex Guerin's background. He had previously been in the Soviet Union as a mole for the CIA, and failed in one of his assignments and was cast out. But this character, the lieutenant colonel, asks for him, sort of making the statement that I only want to work with somebody who has as much to lose as I do. And so then you sort of see all the efforts made to exfiltrate him. But the condition that he has set, which is sort of a high bar, is that this lieutenant colonel doesn't want to leave alone. He requests that his wife and son be taken along, which creates all sorts of problems. And as the story goes forward, what you see happening is the ghosts and the circumstances of Guerin's earlier failure come to haunt the current failure, and all sorts of complications develop. And ends in a border crossing, and there's a love affair. There's violence, people die, and it was fun to write. And so far, it's been enjoyable to see its success.
Yeah, and congratulations on that. And I always think it's funny when thriller writers talk about mayhem and then say how much fun they're having. Because I got a really strong, so we're going to mix it up and have some questions of all our different authors. So I got a very strong sense, Paul, in reading about you, that you're interested in how the personal meets this kind of high stakes world of espionage and spy. So yeah, I'm wondering if you could, oh wait, and super apologies, but Paul drinks a martini neat. And while he answers this question, I'm going to grab it. I have it right here. But is that true, Paul? And if it is, could you expound on it a little?
Yeah, I came to writing late in my career. Having left one career, I started another. And I was drawn to character. And the thing that interested me in the spy genre was obviously plot. Plot's critical, and the elements that go into a thriller. But to me, plot comes out of character. And so I try to create interesting characters that have strong backgrounds, that are appealing in their own right, and following their lives is what creates empathy in the reader. So if I was going to put myself in one category or another, I would sort of put myself in the category of writers like Joe Cannon or Le Carre, who I admire greatly. In fact, this book, in some ways, is an unconscious homage to A Spy Who Came In From the Cold. Different country, different year, but sort of the grimness and the darkness of the Soviet Union in 1985 match up a little bit with what was happening in Berlin in 1962 when Le Carre said his novel. But character me comes first. and that's what I really enjoy about reading other books. You know, the characters are the driving factor.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating, right? Because, you know, people always want to ask authors if they start with plot or character as if the two can be unentwined. But it makes me want to hop back to Bob because it touches on what you opened with about Tracy as an evolving character. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, maybe with the new book, but maybe with the series as a whole, about whether the character is your entry point and what you think about that whole unanswerable debate.
Yeah, you know, I just got this question from Publishers Weekly, very similar question. And, you know, I think that people read a series because, you know, a lot of things happen in the series, but I agree with Paul. They come back for that one iconic character. I mean, that character becomes who they relate to, and they want to find out, you know, what's going to happen to that character, how their life is going to evolve. You know, what's gonna be new. I mean, it's funny, you know, it's kind of everything you wish for as an author. They close the book and they immediately start asking you questions. What's going to happen to her next? And is this going to happen? And is that going to happen? And gee, they'd love to see this and love to see that. And so, you know, I think people fall in love with characters, but you're right. That's not to set aside the plot. You know, characters in action, I think, are, especially if you're writing a thriller or a mystery, characters in action are what people are drawn to. They want to see those characters doing their job. The best example I can give is my father, who was a pharmacist, but my dad loved to watch mysteries on TV. I mean, every time I can remember when I was a young man, you know, sitting in the family room with my dad, and it was one of the things he loved to do, because he would sit there the whole time and he'd look at me and I'd look at him and he'd say, "Have you figured it out yet? Do you know what happened? You know, and I think everybody loves to do that in mysteries and thrillers. They want to see if it's a mystery, they want to see if they can figure it out, and they want to see if they're smarter than the characters. So I think they are intertwined, and I have never been able to write them separately. I've never had an idea and I'm going to create a character for that idea, and I've never had a character and said I'm going to create it comes together organically.
Yeah, but when you talk about Tracy and in her tracks, it sounds like her character is being impacted by the events of the plot very heavily, and yet nobody but her would react that way to what happens in that novel.
Yeah, you know, it's gonna be very interesting. I put out a post the other day and said, hey, I'm a little anxious, and the reason I'm anxious is because this is really the first book where Tracy is dealing with being a mother going back to work. Mm-hmm. And I can remember my wife, who's a professional, she's an attorney, and I can remember when we were going back to work that first day that the nanny came, mm-hmm. and my wife was in the passenger seat bawling her eyes out. She was bawling, you know, and she just said, you know, what am I doing? I'm leaving my child with a stranger. I think it's a real predicament that a lot of women and more men now that businesses are becoming, you know, more friendly to men taking time off. I think it's a reality they all have to live with. And this was a real problem that Tracy is facing in this book. So the question is going to be whether or not people are willing to accept that, or whether they're going to say, you know, I wanted to get on with the story, or you know, brush this aside. Let's go back to work. I don't think you can do that to a character if you're going to make them real. You know, if she's a real person, and I think of her as a real person, she has to deal with real problems. And I know from my own experience with my wife, that's a real problem. And it's something that really impacted her ability to go back and do her job.
I heartily agree. And I've got to believe that readers everywhere, and especially women, but readers everywhere, will go with you on that, because that reality basis is what makes us sink our teeth, I think, into a great thriller. If Jenny ran the zoo. So JT and Cate, I have to link you both because, you know, marriage. So JT, I would love to talk to you about, I would love you to expound a little on what I call a burgeoning subgenre of the marital thriller. And you have said, you've done the OG, like it's at the wedding itself. Tell us a little bit about, sort of suspense on the intimate stage, let's call it.
Gosh, that's a really good question, because I've never really thought about, okay, I'm writing a thriller about a marriage, even though I'm doing that. I mean, I've done it several times now, but this is a will they or won't they even be able to get to the wedding? Everything that could possibly go wrong is going wrong. But it's all about the relationships. I mean, that's what we all love. That's what we are all experiencing. And that is, there's a lot of room in even the most loving relationship for some secrets. And that's always what I'm trying to dig into. It's like, what are you keeping from that person that you love the most? What is the thing that you're trying to hide from them? And Claire and Jack haven't even had a chance to, get into the marriage, right? They've been engaged, they've been together for a year. They're, still in just this incredibly heady moment of love. And they both have really, really big secrets. And, it's, will they be able to forgive each other and move forward or not? I don't know that I would be really thrilled if I found out that my to-be husband has the background that he has. And I don't know, as a man, if I would be really thrilled to find out that my wife was, maybe a little bit different than I thought she was going to be too. So that's really fun for me. I do like, though, in some of my other books, the marriage is very, very well established. And there are still moments, I've been married for 25 years, going on 26 years. I really don't think I have any secrets from my husband, but I bet I do. I bet there are things that he doesn't know. I mean, he'll tell me a story. We've obviously, like everyone, had a lot of time together during the pandemic. And I've heard stories that I've never heard 28 years later. Because we've been together that long. I've never heard that story before. So what do we let our people know, and what do we hold back from them? And of course, you put it in a thriller and then you can just blow it up.
Yeah, well, you said something that makes so much sense, that privacy is relational, right? And we always have, in fact, sometimes I think the secrets that you want to keep are most from the people that you love, because you care so much about their opinion of you and what they do, and there's matters so much to how you see yourself. Yeah. And so I think people in some ways are more protective of some of their thoughts and feelings, particularly if this is a relationship that's somewhat new, but they're hoping is going to be the defining relationship of their life, because it's like, well, they're thinking, now we're getting in here, and this is my chance to make the first impression that's going to carry me through. So they don't necessarily want to say, oh, by the way, here are all my flaws, have a field day, right? They want to be seen in a certain light. And it kind of brings me, the title of my book, Her Three Lives, comes from this quote by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And he said, everyone has three lives, public, private, and secret. And so that's kind of what I was getting at. And I love that you can explore that in these domestic suspense stories, because you are dealing with these intimate relationships, yet we still have secret lives, thoughts that we have that we keep to ourselves, or sometimes the secrets that we share, let's say with our best girlfriend or our sister or our mother, but not with our husband, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a big, nasty secret, but it might be important enough that you don't want to share it. And then what are the miscommunications that come when that happens and people aren't giving full disclosure? And now add a technology element of, people can put cameras everywhere, they can see things, they can misinterpret information. And so I just think that's kind of like, it's rife for thrilling scenarios, and for all the things that we write about, for mistakes and miscommunications that then tumble into bigger mistakes. And I think we all deal with it as authors too, kind of figuring out with social media, like, well, what of my private life do I share? What do I keep to myself? I know I'm guilty of, posting pictures with my kids because I love them and they're so much part of my life and they're cute, but I'm like totally violating their privacy. I'm putting on like a public author page being like, this is what I did today. And later on, for all I know, my kids are going to sue me. And so it's,
let's hope not.
Let's hope not. But you wonder, where are these lines? And
So then I guess again for Kate and JT, do you feel like the domestic suspense, the domestic thriller genre is talking about reality-based lives and like small, big stakes on the intimate stage kind of thing? Or does it move completely off that into lives we couldn't have, is it the relatability factor that makes it so powerful? Or are we in people's stories that really we know it could never happen to us, but we like to inhabit those worlds? Was that at all clear? Something about what Kate was saying touched that.
yeah. JT,
I
you
think
wanna
it's
take that?
both.
Both.
Well, I mean, I think that, look, most of us don't know people that have been involved in a murder, or personally, I hope not. And so I think that we try to kind of give our characters these organic flaws that are relatable, but maybe with the nth degree. So, I have a character who has a childhood that was definitely complicated. And so that's one of the things that she wants to kind of keep secret from her husband, because she's afraid that that will lead to kind of certain stereotypes that she doesn't want to feed into. But I think that we try to make it where someone can imagine that if they also suffered certain traumas in their lives or in their history, how that might make them react, more strongly to certain stimuli than the average person, and then therefore get into these scenarios. But yeah, I often tell my mom read one of the characters, and she thought that she saw a lot of herself in this character, but not to that degree, because otherwise we would all find ourselves in really bad situations constantly.
Right. So turned up to 11.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's very insightful, Kate. So, okay, let's move a little bit sideways. JT and Paul, you both touched on something that I'd love to hear you each address. We could start with Paul, bounce to JT, or however you want to do it. Just don't do that Zoom thing where everybody's like, you. Well, I'm going to make a ruling. We'll talk, JT will take it because I see you right there, and then Paul. So we talked about literary homage or allusions. JT, I have seen you compared in the reviews to Daphne du Maurier, which is, but yeah, definitely deserving. And Paul, you talked about Le Carré. Let's talk about the influences on each of your new books and how aware you might have been of that as you were writing.
I was very aware, because I was actually reading Rebecca. I was listening to it for the first time. I've read it a million times. I've never listened to it for another book. And as I was listening to it, a fundamental question came to me that I was waiting to see if it ever got answered, and it never was. And I went, well, okay, if she didn't answer that, I wonder if I could. And, I think we all have to have that book that is this isn't a retelling. It is an homage without a doubt, but it touches on all of the tropes of this genre of the Gothic thriller. And it touches on all of the things that she was trying to do with this claustrophobia and the closed circle and all of that, so there's very much elements of that. I was so hyper aware of it that it actually, I had incredible writer's block while I was doing it, because you can't retell the story, right? This isn't a retelling. That's not what it is. But I wanted to be sure to, pay good attention to what she had done. And it got paralyzing for me, which is, not really the way you want to go about doing one of these. Paul, I'm curious to hear how you felt doing that. If you want to do the right thing for them. You want it to be perfect. You want it to be perfect for your readers, and you want to be perfect for the person that you have been inspired by. And that's, for me, it got a little paralyzing a couple of times.
Okay, so I know we have lots of book club members in the audience. JT is talking about Her Dark Lives, and Rebecca is kind of an homage. If you want to do a really fun book club, you could get them both. And Paul, let's hear about The Mercenary and Le Carré.
So I will answer that, but before I do, let me go back to this question of secrecy that was touched on in the last discussion. One of the things that I find interesting about spies is that while we all lie in our lives and we all tell little sort of deceits and have secrets, the interesting thing about the spy is the spy does it for work. It sort of embraces an entire world of lying for the purposes of, sometimes personal gain and oftentimes for a higher principle. But the idea that you're living this lie, this falsehood, and then going about the world and people acting upon what you've told them or what you're doing becomes a very interesting dynamic which is one of the reasons I sort of put myself into this genre. But to the question, I think I started off writing the books that I like to read, and intelligent work by Le Carré has always absorbed me. But I remember when I first read A Spy Who Comes In From the Cold, it just moved me. I felt like I was in that world in Berlin, and it took over my consciousness while I was reading it. And then when I closed the covers of the book, it stayed with me. And so in a way, that world, those characters have always been in the back of my mind. So when I began writing, novels that involve spies, they are an echo sort of in the back of my mind. But I wasn't really conscious of that when I wrote the book. I know the Spy Who Comes In From the Cold very well, and I very consciously didn't reflect on it while I was writing it, because you want to be able to create the sort of the distance that allows you to create something that readers will think of as an echo without necessarily saying, oh, that's imitation. And I think art and imitation, we all sort of in some way embrace the work of the people we really respect. I mean, we had talked earlier about Ripley, and that's a book I sometimes think, how can I write my Ripley book? Because it's just such an amazing story. But on the other hand, you sort of have to say, okay, whatever I'm going to write, it can't be that story. It may have echoes and hints of the story, but the character, I think fundamentally, the character has to be different. Some of the plot lines may be similar, but ultimately, as Robert said, readers go after character. And in the similarity of characters, I think where you cross the line to the wrong side. So if your character is unique, the storylines can be, vaguely similar. And I think you produce a work that will, be interesting in its own right, but also interesting because people will say, oh, that sort of has a reminder of this other book that I love so much. And I think one of the satisfying things for me was, particularly in England, the English spy novel has a longer tradition than the American spy novel. But many of the reviewers in England have said, this guy, this American really has nailed the English spy novel.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very interesting what you're saying about character, and it does tie into what Bob started with, because no two writers are ever going to be able to write, there's only 13 plots, but JT,
7.
Bob, Cate, Paul, they could all write the exact same story, but they would not be able to write the same character because that's uniquely tied to the marrow and meat of you. So, I mean, as always in Rogue Reads, I feel like we could easily, this could be like a Thriller Fest panel just on its own, but let's bounce a little bit and over to Bob, who was called the master of Seattle menace in The Big Thrill, which I found really interesting. It made me think, and I've thought this before in reading your work, about Tana French and Dublin. I'd like to talk a little bit, Bob, I'd like you to talk a little bit about setting and its role and place in your book, in her tracks, but also in all of the books. And then we'll go through each author and get your sense of setting and place.
Setting, there's 3 elements to a good novel: plot, character, and everybody forgets the third. And the third is setting. And I teach a class, a seminar on writing called the Novel Writing Intensive. And I remember I read this book one time, and it was all about the trial of this African-American man. And the author, in the first 50 pages that I read, critiqued the author never said where the trial was taking place. And I said, don't you think that could matter? This is 1980 that the story was written in. And he was like, well, you know, I live in the South. It's obviously in the South. I said, you never said it. I mean, it makes a big difference. I mean, can you imagine if To Kill a Mockingbird was told in Seattle, Washington, as opposed to Macomb, Georgia? It would be a completely different book, maybe, you know, I mean, but so setting is intricate to the plot because it's intricate to the character. Your characters have to live in the setting. It's not just a backdrop like a play. They have to live in it. They have to, you know, be a part of it. And I remember that somebody asked we've had a number of different serial killers here in Seattle, Washington, including the infamous, you know, Ted Bundy was here for a while. We've had the Green River Killer, probably the most prolific killer, you know, in the history of serial killers. We've had Wee Willie was up here. He was killed. I mean, and people asked the detective that finally got the Green River Killer, who I had a chance to interview once. They asked him, you know, why are there so many serial killers in Seattle? And he said, because there are so many ways to dispose of a body. We have mountains, we have lakes, we have rivers, we have streams, we have the ocean, we have swamps. I mean, you know, I never thought that Bigfoot could possibly be real until I was driving over the I-90 pass and looked at nothing but wilderness for as far as the eye could see for miles and miles and miles, just nothing. There's nothing out there. And I thought, you know, maybe it could happen. So, I mean, it's something that, you know, Tracy has to live with. She lives in a place where people can go missing very easily. And is it something nefarious, or is it just something that happened? You know, someone went on a hike and didn't come back. You know, we have there's sadly, very sadly, being the father of a 21-year-old daughter, the majority of people that are involved in violent crimes are women, young women, disappear and or are murdered all the time. And you know, it's something that you have to be conscious of, especially in a place like this. Is, you know, you go off in a remote locale to go on a hike. You know, you want to go with somebody. You want to go with a group of people because, you know, it takes one push from one wrong guy, and no one, they might not even ever find you again.
Or a jog.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, setting is intimate to the character. And if it's intimate to the character, you have to make it intimate to the reader. And the other example that I like to give, it just went in and out of my head, but it's the story of the grizzly bear with
Verna. Are you talking about Herzog?
No, The Edge. It's called The Edge.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, if you know, you're in the middle of nowhere and you got a grizzly bear that gets the scent and the taste of human blood.
Yeah.
You know, the setting becomes the story.
Right.
And so I try to let my characters live in their settings. And, you know, I think it's interesting for people. I'll get emails from people who will say to me, hey, we're coming to Seattle and we'd like to go to that restaurant you described. Where is it? We can't find it. Well, it doesn't exist. And a lot of times I'll do that because, you know, I don't want to disparage a place, or you know, whatever it is. I'll just, you know, I'll put a restaurant that I've been in, but I'll change the name or something. But, you know, it's real to the character. And if it's real to the character, it'll be real to the reader.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that use of the word intimate, and also setting as the third main component. So JT, an island off the coast of Italy, couldn't be anywhere else. I want you to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on setting. Paul, 1985 USSR, and Cate, I'm going to say like every house. So let's start with JT and then go right through to Paul and then Cate.
Setting is a character in every single one of my books. It is the primary point of this particular book. and it's the first time in 25 novels that I have made up a setting. I always have, I mean, most of my books are set in Nashville or have a major Nashville component. There's only been, I think, one that didn't. And that's on purpose, because I think, just like what Bob was saying, it's incredibly rich material for you to work with. And it's really funny, when I first started, I had so many details about Nashville that my dad read it and he was like, literally, we don't need to know every single road name as you know. So setting is not the details of, okay, he turned right on Belmead Boulevard. It's about the personality of the city, the personality of the setting, the personality of everywhere that you're going, and how that affects people. I mean, if it's a sunny day, if it's a rainy day, obviously there are going to be differences in how you approach things. I have never made up a setting before, and this was the most challenging book I have ever done, because I took from multiple places and married them onto this island. And it was really hard not to get carried away with the description of everything that was going on, because I was cementing the setting in my own head. But it was vital to the story. It had to be where it was. Matter of fact, at one point, somebody asked me, does it need to be in Italy? And I'm like, yes, it does. This couldn't be in Nashville. This couldn't be off the coast of Nantucket. It absolutely has to be in Italy. That is part of the story, so integral to the characters, to the storyline, to everything that you're seeing. No, I can't move it. And I think that's when you know that your character, your setting is a character. If you can't remove it from the story and have an impact, then obviously you're doing it right.
You've got it right. Yeah. I legit am certain you're going to get requests for where the island is so people can visit it. Okay, so I want to make sure we have time to get to our readings, but Paul, real quick, 1985 USSR, and Cate, every house. Or if you don't see it that way, you can argue with me. Paul, let's start with you.
I agree with the other people that the character is almost the first, setting is the first critical choice in many ways, because it establishes what people are drawn to, what their fears are, why they're there. And in the case of Moscow in 1985, it was a denied city. Americans were under constant surveillance when they left the embassy. And so this sense of threat, provocation is woven into the novel. And then there's a reason why most spy novels are set in one of four cities: Moscow, Berlin, Beirut, and Hong Kong. It's because those are the crossroads at the edge of the conflict between major powers. And I think it's as JT said, the reason that characters are in a place defines what's going to happen in that place. So I agree with JT and with Robert that character, plot, and setting, are the fundamental tools that we as writers, work with.
Yeah, the trifecta. I love that. All right, Cate, real quick, do you agree every house is your setting for your brand new one with Hachette, or no, something else?
Yeah, well, I think I think that your house has to be located somewhere, and also in a time. We talk about setting. Time is very important, right? So I know, the house takes place it's in Rye, New York, and his prior house, he's an architect. His prior house was in Greenwich, and I actually found this architect's site that they must have thought I was going to actually buy a house, because I lived on this site. They're like, when is this woman going to pull the trigger? And I was just taking rooms. I was like, that room is in this house. And but I think that my new story, it had to kind of take place outside of the New York City suburbs, because I wanted this kind of confluence of affluence and this need to present a certain face to your community, and the competitiveness that I think is sometimes in the Northeast between between neighbors who are ostensibly friends. And so I wanted all of that. And I think that comes in. And I also wanted to have the juxtaposition of a place where you could have these very expensive homes and this one kind of lifestyle with, like, you know, these areas in Queens where you could be in a much poorer neighborhood, and they really are, you know, a 15-minute drive or a couple subway stops.
Yeah, that wealth disparity. Sometimes I wonder if it's anywhere else, maybe on the opposite coast. So this is fascinating. I am hoping we will have time to get to some of our audience members' questions, but let's have you all, don't do what happened to me at one of my favorite events in Georgia, but my co-author like read for, but I'll be really torn, but I'll have to cut you great voices off. Bob, would you be able to read us a brief excerpt from Inner Trunks?
Yeah, sure. So this is just going to be about a page. So let me just set it up real quickly. Bobby Chin is a Seattle Police Department officer. He's in the midst of a very bitter divorce. He has a 5-year-old daughter named Ellie. Whenever he goes to pick up his daughter at his ex-wife's, she has a boyfriend living in the house, and it frustrates the hell out of him because he doesn't trust this guy with his daughter. And so he got set up basically, and she has one domestic charge against him. So he's got to be very careful. And what he really wants is he wants his daughter to love him. He wants to be a good dad. And so he picks his daughter up and he's taking her to a corn maze. It's the night before Halloween. And he gets there and he's late because he had a late case. He's late, so he's rushing, and they're getting ready to shut off the lights at the corn maze. And he says to the kid, "Hey, just give me 15 minutes. Just let me get through the corn maze for my daughter." And the guy says, "Okay, fine, but I got to charge you full price." And the guy, "That's fine, I don't care." So they're in the corn maze. Bobby Chin took his daughter's hand and they entered the maze. The thick stalks exceeded 6 feet and made the path narrow. He moved as quickly as Ellie's little legs allowed, not wanting to rush her, but wanting to get through the maze before the lights went out. "Pretty cool, huh, Butterfly?" She's wearing a butterfly costume for Halloween. Ellie stared at the stalks of corn. Then she said, "Let's play hide and seek, Daddy." "We don't have time for that, Ellie. We have to get through." "Please, Daddy." "I'm sorry, honey. Maybe we can play at home." Ellie cried. Then she sat down in the dirt. "Ellie, get up, honey. You're getting your costume filthy." "No. Honey, you have to stand up." "I want to play. Mommy lets me play." The counselor Chin had seen for his court-ordered anger management classes had warned that kids going through a contentious divorce could become defiant and play one parent off the other. "Ellie, you need to stand up." "No. Graham plays with me." Chin felt his heart ripping apart. "Okay, one quick game, all right?" Ellie got to her feet. "Yay! But when I say come out, you have to come out, okay?" "You count, Daddy. You have to hide your eyes." "Okay, but if I say come out, you come out, right?" "Turn around when you count." Chin turned and counted. It wouldn't be hard to find Ellie's colorful butterfly wings went among the green corn stalks. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. At 6, he cheated and turned. He didn't see Ellie's wings behind the corn stalks. "Here I come." He stepped forward. "I'm coming." He searched the aisle, looking under the drooping leaves. He turned the corner to another row, then a third and a fourth. He checked his watch, felt himself starting to panic. He shouted, "Okay, Ellie, I give up. Come out." He turned in a circle, looking, hearing the wind rustle the stalks. "Don't let the lights go out," he murmured under his breath. He called again, "Ellie, you have to come out. The game is over, Ellie." His heart raced. He jogged, turning left and right down the rows, shouting her name. "Ellie, come out. Ellie, Ellie." He turned a corner, disoriented. Another corner. Ellie's colorful butterfly wings lay in the dirt. "Ellie." Then the lights went out.
Yeah, Kate says her daughter's name is Ellie. Somebody typed in the chat, OMG. Yeah, I could barely listen to that, but it was brilliant, Bob. So take my barely being able to listen to it as a sign of brilliance. Thank you very much. JT, would you be able to read us a brief excerpt from Her Dark Lies?
Sure. Just gonna do a page. "She is going to die tonight. The white dress, long and filmy, hampers her effort to run. The hem catches on a branch. A large rend in the fabric slashes open, exposing her leg. A deep cut blooms red along her thigh, and the blood runs down her calf. Her hair has come loose from its braid, flies unbound behind her like gossamer wings. In her panic, she barely notices the pain. The path ahead is marked by towering cypress and laurel, verdant and lush. A gray stone waist-high wall is all that stands between her and the cliffside. It's cool inside this miniature forest. The sky is blotted out by the purple-throated wisteria that drapes across and between the trees. Someone years ago built an archway along the arbor. The arch's skeleton has long since rotted away, and the flowers droop into the path, clinging trails and vines that brush against her head and shoulders. Whoops. I turned 2 pages instead of 1. Well, that was exciting.
Cliffhanger.
It's a brand new book. It's all stuck together. Okay. It should be beautiful. Instead, it feels oppressive, as if the vines might animate, twist, and curl around her neck and strangle her to death. She tries not to look down to the frothing water roiling against the rocks at the cliff's base. She thinks the ruins are to her right. From what she remembers, they are between the church and the artist colony, the 4 cottages cowering on the hillside, empty and waiting. A horn shrieks, and she realizes the ferry is pulling away. A crack of lightning, and she sees the silhouette of the captain in the pilot house, looking out to the turbulent seas ahead. A gamble that he makes it before the storm is upon them. Don't panic. Don't panic. Where's the church? There it is, a flash of white through the trees. The stuccoed wall looms, the bell tower hidden behind the overgrown foliage. Now the path is moving upward, the grade increasing. She feels it in her calves and hopes again she's going the right way. The villa is on the hill, on the northwest promontory of the island. If she can reach its doors, she'll be safe. It's too quiet. There are no birds, no creatures, no buzzing or cries, just her ragged, heavy breath and the scree shuffling underfoot as she climbs. The furious roar of the water smashing its frustration against the rocks rises from her left, echoing against the cliffside. The dogs begin to howl.
You have such a visual language, JT.
Thank you.
You see the entire thing. Thank you very much. Cate, would you be able to read us a brief excerpt from Her 3 Lives?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. So I'm going to start with chapter 2 because I already told you it gets hit over the head in chapter 1. So, okay. Pride goeth before destruction. The proverb was one of Abigail Thompson's favorites. Growing up, Jade had heard her mother mutter it many a time after hearing that misfortune had befallen a seemingly upstanding individual. To her mom's credit, Abigail never uttered it with the smug satisfaction of some of the other churchwomen, as though she'd personally warned the poor soul that his luck would change if he didn't show God more gratitude. She tended to say it in the same tenor as an apology. Abigail regretted that heaven's standards were so impossible, but it wasn't for men to judge the laws of the Lord. The Savior didn't punish without reason. If tragedy struck a decent family, then in Abigail's mind, Jesus must have determined them insufficiently thankful for their blessings. Jade had little use for Proverbs 16:18 or any other biblical victim blaming. As far as she was concerned, the universe meted out vengeance with the precision of an atomic bomb. Storms leveled cities, men and women were murdered, raped, babies died in utero. There were myriad reasons, and chief among them was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But prayer, or lack thereof, wasn't one. She learned that lesson at age 7 when she'd still been a true believer, and she was certain that what had happened a week earlier had nothing to do with the divine or justice. There'd be no convincing Abigail of that, though. Jade could feel her mother's disapproving gaze boring into her back as she draped a bright orange cloth over the kitchen table. In her peripheral vision, she could see Abigail's pursed lips above the newspaper held roughly in her hands. Part of Jade wanted to tell her mother that she had no right to judge at the moment. Abigail was not the one with the fiance in the hospital. Abigail had not been attacked. But Jade had long learned that fighting with a woman who believed in preordination was pointless. Jade slipped into the neighboring kitchen. She grabbed a white plate from the cupboard and brought it beside the still sizzling cast iron skillet. The air was saturated with the smells of frying oil and fish, reminding her of Lenten Fridays as a child. She grabbed a spatula from a basket beside the stove, slipped it under the small snapper, and transferred the fish to her plate. Scales shone pink around the snapper's gelatinous eye and glowering mouth. Jade's stomach twisted with sudden revulsion. She pulled back the fridge door and dipped her head inside, sucking in the cold air to settle her stomach. Ever since the attack, the weirdest things set off waves of nausea. Jade pressed the heel of her hand into her flat stomach until the feeling subsided. She then yanked the pickling jar from the fridge's top shelf and shut the door. Twisting off the metal lid released the trapped fumes of fermenting Scotch bonnet peppers. Jade's eyes watered as she grabbed a spoon from a drawer beside the stove and scooped out several slices of carrots, bell peppers, and ginger root, spreading them like jam jam across the top of the fish. Even with her blurred vision, she could tell the plate would look pretty on the orange backdrop. She carried her culinary painting to the table and placed it in the center of the fabric, taking a moment to admire how the cloth's color highlighted the carrots atop the fish. She returned to the kitchen for a fork and a knife, a deep purple napkin, and the flowers that she intended to take to the hospital later, a lavish arrangement with 2 bird of paradise blooms emerging from a nest of violet orchids. As she staged the area around the plate, Jade could feel her mother's anger intensifying, heating the air between them like a blast from an opened oven. She tried to ignore it, focusing only on the still life framed in her iPhone screen and the sumptuousness of the food at the photo center. The pictures looked appetizing, although a tad brassy thanks to the afternoon light streaming through her mother's west-facing window. The right filter would tone down the color. Jade grabbed the fork and carefully peeled a morsel off the fish's side. She stabbed it along with a bright yellow pepper and then brought the lot up to her coral-painted mouth, smiling as if unaware of the cell phone camera clicking in her extended left hand. Her mother jostled the newspaper. "Sweetheart, for shame." Jade placed the bite back on the plate. "It's been nearly a week. If I don't put up a post soon, I'll lose followers." "Lose them then." The paper smacked against the table. "Your husband-to-be is in a coma."
I love the anger and the peppers. It's very visceral. Very nice. Thank you. And gosh, social media. Love it or leave it. Paul, last but not least, would you be able to read us a brief excerpt from The Mercenary? And then our audience members, if you have a question to put in the chat, I think Chris's nominee is managing that. And thank you, hats off to Chris, who is doing our tech tonight. And I will look for them too. So feel free, we'll at least go for a couple more minutes. And Paul, yeah, if you can read us an excerpt, we'd love to hear from The Mercenary.
Sure, thank you. It's from the middle of the book. You don't really need to know anything. It's one paragraph at the start of chapter 6. Doubt wasn't new to Garen. He lived with doubt for years, and with doubt came fear. His childhood fear had been crippling, but he had trained himself to confront his demons. He tested himself against the dark, sleeping in his bedroom without the nightlight, trembling and afraid to close his eyes, but unwilling to surrender. As a 10-year-old, he had stood at the edge of an abandoned quarry, inching toward the precipice, feeling the nausea of vertigo. He had closed his eyes, feeling the lip with his toes and imagining the 100-foot drop. He made fear his companion, and he came to understand that men who weren't afraid were either lying to themselves or colossally stupid.
It's very deep to say with doubt comes fear. And what a perfect sign off for this evening, because it's like a sign of our times. If we could all just admit that with doubt comes fear. That's if Paul ran the zoo. I like it. Thank you very much for your beautiful readings, JT and Bob and Cate and Paul. And really just thank you so much for being here tonight. I want everybody to get Her 3 Lives and The Mercenary, Her Dark Lies and Inner Tracks, because you'll have reading for the next weekend. And just such a lot of fun hearing these authors' voices for real and in their books. Chris, I see lots of comments like, now I really want this book or that book. And I remember reading it when some people have already read the books. Are there questions that I'm missing? I'll feel horribly guilty and not get much sleep tonight.
There are lots of comments, but a few questions. I think this was an amazing panel of authors. I'm enthralled, and I have to tell you, Bob, when you were reading, it reminded me of a time when my 4-year-old disappeared in Walmart, and I panicked, and I could not find her anywhere. And the next thing I know is I hear, "Will Mrs. Goff please come to customer service?" And I walk over there, and my little sweetheart is eating a lollipop, sitting on the counter, laughing with somebody. And I was like, okay, nobody killed you, but I'm going to as soon as I get you out to the car. It was so scary. And it just brought it all back when you were reading that.
My my wife had a similar experience. This is where I got the idea. My son actually came up with the idea for the corn maze. But when my son was about 4 years old, my wife took him into a department store, and she turned around and she turned back around and he was gone. And she immediately bolted to the front of the store and yelled at the clerk, lock the doors, don't let anyone out. And
Yeah.
at the top of her lungs, she was, and I mean, my wife's a pretty, she was just yelling,
Yeah.
I can't find my child,
Yeah.
no one leaves the store.
Yeah.
And turns out he was hiding in one of the clothes racks. And
Well-
when he heard, her yelling, he came out, and of course he was terrified at that point. But he was
I
hiding-
grew up in Evergreen, and I mean, my kids grew up in the mountains, and you were talking about grizzly bears. I mean, we had mountain lions, we had bears, and the kids played outside. I never thought a thing about it. They knew what to do.
Yeah.
But people in Walmart scared the crap out of me.
Yeah. Well, we all had that image, like both when Chris and Bob are talking, right? That image from the Adam Walsh movie, and that is that scenario in the department store. I mean, I think it made it so live to us. And so, yeah, Bob, you put it in a corn maze and we're all like, I never thought Halloween. I mean, yeah, Halloween. Anyway, thank you all for being here tonight. Bob, Robert Dugoni, JT Ellison, Cate Holahan, and Paul Vidich, your wonderful new books. Thank you to the Rogue Reads crowd. It's always great that you guys come on. You're what makes it fun to do this. Be sure to tune in May 17th. Our own Lisa Black hosting Rogue Reads, and the guests are Jeffrey Deaver, Daniel Palmer, Chris Calvin, and Hannah Mary McKinnon. Because I messed up her name, I'm going to tell you that I call Hannah Mary the queen of the happily never after. I cannot thank you enough, Bob and JT and Cate and Paul, because it's been an honor getting to talk to you. And thank you, Chris, for tech, and thank you, Rogue Women Writers, for making this event come to be. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and our audience gets some great new books tonight.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jenny.
Thank
You did
you.
an amazing job.
Good
Appreciate
night,
it.